How does a bodybuilder gain 35 pounds in 7 weeks, beat a man who looks better on stage, and take home bodybuilding's most coveted trophy? June 1950, Scala Theatre, London. Steve Reeves stands softer than in 47 to 48. Beside him, 22-year-old Reg Park, shredded, bigger through the chest, sharper everywhere. The judges split 4-2. Reeves wins by 1 point. The room erupts, just not all in applause. 7 weeks earlier, Reeves was 190 and written off at York Barbell. Then the weight roared back. 5 pounds a week. Muscle memory, or something darker. Favoritism, or just different criteria? Stick with me. I'll lay out the scorecard. Symmetry, proportion, lines, maturity, legs, and show why 4 judges chose Reeves while 2 swore Park was the future. The Hollywood sacrifice, rewind to 1947. Steve Reeves just won Mr. America, the highest title in bodybuilding. Nowhere else to go. The photos from that victory caught Hollywood's attention, and scouts told him he should be in movies. Steve, recognizing the opportunity, pivoted his entire life toward acting, because bodybuilding didn't pay, but movies could make you rich. Then 1948 brought new contests. Steve won Mr. World, placed second at Mr. Universe to John Grimek, but his focus stayed on Hollywood. When a scout offered him an audition for Samson and Delilah, directed by the legendary Cecil B. DeMille, Steve crushed it so hard they gave him a 7-year contract on the spot. Days later, he was on a plane to California, ready to become a star. First day on set, Steve walked into DeMille's office and froze. A full-size poster of him hung on the wall. That iconic perfection in the clouds shot. DeMille pointed at it and said, "That is my Samson." But then everything collapsed. Steve looked too massive in person. DeMille told him to lose 20 pounds because the camera adds size. So Steve started cutting. Every week he dropped 5 pounds. His friends saw him on the beach and reacted with horror, telling him he was destroying himself just to become another Hollywood actor. Meanwhile, DeMille kept demanding faster weight loss. After 3 brutal months, Steve had dropped only 10 pounds. DeMille couldn't wait. He gave the role to Victor Mature instead. Steve had sacrificed his physique for absolutely nothing. The damage showed in 1949 when Steve took 3rd at Mr. USA behind Clancy Ross and John Grimek. Photos from that contest revealed the truth. Steve looked softer, less defined, a ghost of his former glory. He'd ruined himself chasing a dream that didn't want him. But he finally landed a role later that year in Kimbar of the Jungle, a hilariously bad series where he fought dudes dressed as lions, and they made him lose even more weight for it. For 2 years, Steve sacrificed bodybuilding for Hollywood. He destroyed what made him legendary to please directors who kept rejecting him. If you're wondering how this connects to that controversial 1950 Mr. Universe decision, just wait. Because what comes next is where things get really suspicious. The desperate comeback. Only weeks before the 1950 Mr. Universe, John Grimek invited Steve to compete and offered to sponsor the trip to London. One massive problem: Steve hadn't trained seriously in almost a year. He weighed 35 pounds below competition weight. Most people can't gain 35 pounds of muscle in a year. Steve had 7 weeks. But he'd already won every title except Mr. Universe, and that gap bothered him, so he made the insane decision to try. When Steve walked into York Barbell Club in Philadelphia, jaws dropped. John Grimek later wrote about everyone's shock at Steve's condition. His arms, shoulders, chest, and back had lost any semblance of muscularity. The gym's consensus was brutal. Steve didn't have a chance of even placing, let alone winning. 7 weeks out, he looked like a guy who'd never touched a weight. What happened next defied everything people thought they knew about muscle growth. Steve trained 2 to 4 hours daily, moving from exercise to exercise like a machine. No rest, no socializing, just pure intensity. By week 5, something remarkable happened. His size started coming back. By week 6, the whispers stopped. The guys who'd written him off started saying it would take one hell of a competitor to beat him now. The steroid accusations. Here's where people's eyebrows raised then and still raise now. Steve went from 190 to 225 in 7 weeks. That's 5 pounds per week. 5. Most natural lifters struggle to gain 5 pounds of muscle in 6 months. Steve did it weekly. At York Barbell Club, the birthplace of American performance drug experimentation. You see where this is going. Years later, Sergio Oliva dropped a bomb that exploded through the bodybuilding world. He claimed everybody in the old days used them. Zane, Columbu, himself, Arnold, Larry Scott, and even Steve Reeves. Even Steve. That hit different, because Steve had been the loudest anti-steroid voice in bodybuilding. He'd said, if you need drugs to build muscle, you should take up ping pong. He predicted steroids would kill people by 65 and lived to 74 as proof. But think about it. Steroids existed in 1950, synthesized back in 1937. Steve was training at the gym that would later become Ground Zero for PED use. His transformation was impossible by natural standards. The timeline, the location, the speed all pointed one direction. If Steve used, it would explain everything about what happened on that stage in London. But we still haven't answered the real question. Why would judges pick Steve over Reg Park anyway? Enter Reg Park, the real threat. Because Reg didn't just look good that night, he looked unbeatable. At 22 years old with only 2 years of training, Reg had built himself into a monster. 215 at 6 feet, with a 53-inch chest and 18.25-inch arms. But here's what mattered. Reg was cut to shreds. His legs, torso, and arms showed definition that made everyone take notice. His chest measured bigger than Steve's. His muscle density was superior. His conditioning was sharper. Joe Weider trained both men and expected Reg to win easily. He'd seen Steve months before looking so slender that he didn't think Steve could even be competitive. Meanwhile, Reg represented something new, the marriage of size and strength that would define bodybuilding's future. Everyone who saw him knew it. The fix seemed in. Reg would win, take the title, keep the prize in England where it belonged. About that prize. The 1950 Mr. Universe wasn't offering just any trophy. The prize was the original bronze Sandow statue from 1901, awarded at bodybuilding's first major contest. That statue had been private for 49 years before NABBA offered it as their grand prize, and organizers were certain Reg Park would win it. Absolutely certain. They wanted their British hero to keep that priceless piece of history home. That detail matters more than you think. If organizers favored anyone, it was Reg. They literally dangled the most prestigious prize in bodybuilding history, expecting him to claim it. So when people suggest the judges showed Steve favoritism, they're ignoring a crucial fact. Everyone wanted Reg to win. The promoters, the crowd, even Steve's own trainer, Joe Weider. Nobody expected what actually happened. Contest night. The split decision. June 24, 1950, Scala Theatre, London. Steve and Reg stood side by side. Both weighed around 215. Both had 18-inch arms. But Reg's chest measured bigger. His cuts ran deeper. His muscularity was more pronounced. Yet, Steve had that 29-inch waist against Reg's 32, creating a more dramatic taper. Steve's proportions echoed Greek statues. Reg's physique screamed modern power. Backstage, Steve was sweating bullets. He later admitted he expected an easy victory until he saw Reg Park. He called Reg absolutely incredible. Better than legends like Grymek or Ross. Steve genuinely thought he might lose. Reg remembered that Steve was a very worried man before the announcement. An editor had to work hard convincing Steve he'd actually won. That's how uncertain it felt. The crowd went crazy when they announced Steve's name, but the decision barely held. 4 judges for Steve, 2 for Reg. 1 point separated them. The judges said Steve had better legs and a more mature physique with better lines. Translation: aesthetics barely beat muscularity. Classical proportions edged out modern mass by the thinnest margin possible. Reg's reaction: "I should have won." Reg didn't hide his feelings. He openly stated he should have won. He was more muscular, with better overall size. Looking at photos, it's hard to argue. But Reg showed maturity beyond his 22 years. He realized that with less than 2 years of training, he'd nearly beaten a 5-year veteran. So he made a promise. Nobody would beat him in 1951. And nobody did. Reg destroyed the 1951 Mr. Universe at 23, won again in 1958 and 1965, became the first bodybuilder to bench 500 pounds, inspired Arnold Schwarzenegger to pick up weights. Meanwhile, Steve retired, moved to Europe, became the highest-paid actor on the continent as Hercules, and launched bodybuilding into mainstream consciousness worldwide. The missing controversy. Here's the twist nobody saw coming. You'd expect modern social media to explode about this robbery, Reddit threads demanding justice, YouTube videos screaming scandal, Instagram campaigns calling for overturned decisions. But that backlash doesn't exist. I searched everywhere from 2015 to 2025. No significant movement claiming Reg got robbed. John Park, Reg's son, made Instagram posts in 2019 saying his father was sharper, harder, more muscular. But even those posts didn't spark massive controversy. Why? Because the bodybuilding community understands something crucial that explains this entire mystery. Both men deserve to win. This wasn't a robbery. This was the exact moment bodybuilding stood at a crossroads. Steve represented the aesthetic ideals of the past: flowing lines, classical proportions, Greek god symmetry. Reg represented the future: dense muscle, raw power, modern mass. In 1950, 4 judges looked at that comparison and chose the past. 2 judges chose the future. If the contest happened 5 years later, when size started dominating, Reg wins easily. But it didn't. The truth behind the transformation. The evidence for Steve's steroid use actually points the opposite direction. Grimek witnessed everything firsthand and never hinted at drugs. Steve lacked the extreme mass of confirmed users. The York Barbell experiments didn't start until years later. Steve's explanation was muscle memory. When you've built something before, your body can rebuild it exponentially faster. Modern science confirms this through cellular nuclei that remain in muscle tissue even after atrophy. Steve's comeback wasn't impossible. It was just improbable enough to raise questions he'd carry forever. But here's what really happened on that stage. The truth everyone misses. Steve didn't gain 35 pounds of pure muscle in 7 weeks. He gained 35 pounds total. Some muscle, sure, probably a lot through muscle memory, but also water, glycogen, and inevitably some fat. When you gain weight that fast, you don't stay shredded. That's why Steve looked softer next to Reg. Not because he was off cycle or natural or anything suspicious, just because rapid weight gain comes with rapid fat gain too. The judges faced an impossible choice. Reg brought superior conditioning, bigger chest, deeper cuts, more pronounced muscularity. Steve brought better taper, more mature lines, classical proportions that embodied aesthetic perfection. Neither answer was wrong. They represented different philosophies of what bodybuilding should be. 4 judges preferred one, 2 preferred the other. That 4-2 split wasn't controversy. It was validation that both men had achieved different versions of perfection. Steve himself predicted what came next. He said Reg would be unbeatable in a year or less. He was right. Steve understood that Reg represented evolution, the bigger and more muscular future that would eventually dominate the sport completely. But in 1950, the classical ideal still held power, and Steve's proportions embodied that standard so perfectly that 4 judges couldn't deny him. Think about what was really happening. Steve had destroyed his physique for Hollywood, mounted an insane comeback that raised steroid suspicions forever and represented bodybuilding's aesthetic past. Reg had built himself into a monster in 2 years, brought conditioning nobody could match, and represented the sport's muscular future. 4 judges picked the past. 2 picked the future. Both were right. 75 years later, experts still can't agree. Historians debate it. Fans argue online. Analysts break down photos from every angle. But they never reach consensus. That's not failure. That's the highest compliment 2 competitors can receive. They were both so excellent in completely different ways that choosing between them came down to pure preference. The 1950 Mr. Universe controversy endures not because of scandal, but because of legitimacy. 2 legendary physiques, so different yet so excellent that judges literally split down the middle. Steve's 7-week comeback defied expectations and sparked accusations that evidence doesn't support. Reggie's superior muscularity made him appear robbed until you understand what judges actually valued in 1950. So when people ask how Steve won over Reg, the answer isn't favoritism or drugs or conspiracy. The answer is simpler and more profound. They both won that night. Steve took the bronze Sandow, an official title. Reg took the fire that fueled 3 more victories and inspired Arnold himself. The controversy lives because it was never really controversy. Just 2 versions of perfection on the same stage, and sometimes that's impossible to judge. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly how it should be.